Those of you who got an invite, welcome to Nerd Prom.
No matter where in the world you are, we're all Nerds International. With the hyphen. Nerds International proudly presents.
We want to take you on a quest for knowledge. One that will take us from ancient medieval fantasy across the far reaches of space to the distant future. To many savage worlds.
Welcome to this bonus episode of the Wild Die Podcast. This is a podcast dedicated to Pinnacle Entertainment's Savage Worlds, aimed at beginners and veterans alike. What's going on, Lamoureux? Special edition Thursday night. Here we are.
Yeah, it's been a while. You know, we used to have all these bonus episodes during the week, and then you get busy with your own show, and I got busy with writing and all that stuff, so... But we're doing it for a great cause. I mean, we spent, 2 episodes so far talking with Paris about his, well, I wouldn't say they're issues, but, he wanted to know certain things about Savage Worlds and to get the best out of it. And he made the mistake of asking us because we don't know. All we did was share our opinions, but apparently some people... felt like we were telling him he was doing it wrong, but I don't know. You guys can probably chime in on that, but to me, it felt more like we were just saying what we would do, our opinion. But here's the thing: we got the perfect guy. We invited the perfect guy on the show to answer these questions. Like I was saying before, there was him or another guy that could answer these questions. And this is Clint Black is with us tonight.
Oh, yeah.
Hi, guys.
Yeah, really excited. We've been looking forward to that. So thank you for agreeing to do this, Clint. I hope you don't regret it.
Is this where we put that snippet in from Wayne's World where they go, "We're not worthy, we're not worthy"?
Well, I'm pretty sure I just heard you boo me, so I hope Clint tears you a new one. And Clint, if he starts to cry, let it rain, buddy. Let it rain. Don't be nice.
I don't make people cry in public.
In public.
You sound like my wife. She lets me talk tough in front of my friends, but behind closed doors, yeah.
No, so basically, I invited Clint to share, to explain the Savage Worlds design philosophy, really, behind a certain concept that we talked about over the past 2 episodes. Things like skills and edges, basically, because Paris wants better character niche protection for his players, right? And he also wants a better advancement progression for the characters. So I think the rest of the cast said pretty much all they had to say about it, their opinion, but Clint can certainly shed some light onto this. But before we go further with this, further along, a little bit of news. There's a Kickstarter going on right now for Savage Worlds for the Olympus Inc. line from Fabled Environment. We had Charles White on the show last year, I think, episode 30, something like that. So if you're a fan of the line, or maybe you haven't heard, you don't know anything about it, now's the perfect time, because there's the Pelion Report going on where you can
I was just kidding, Eric. It literally is Pelion Report. I'm really glad you said that, though.
You got me. You got me. I'll get you back, Gary.
Oh, that's awesome.
Oh, man.
You're my favorite, man. You are. You're literally my favorite.
So, let's move on to the meat of the show and take it to the edge with a discussion on what we've been talking about, the crunch for the last 2 episodes. Pelion.
You're listening to the Wild Die Podcast. 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 Listen 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 to the Wild Die Podcast.
It's fantastic. I thought you knew I was kidding, buddy.
No, because Clint was like, "Yeah, it's Pelion." So I'm like, if Clint said it, it's gonna be real true.
I never said that. I didn't. I totally, because you weren't recording and you can't prove it.
That's right. Fair enough. So yeah, basically, what happened is that, a bunch of people, like I said that we were unfair with Paris, and that's fine. I won't apologize for my opinion on how to do what he wanted to do. But the thing is, a friend of mine reached out and said, "Listen, you guys came out a bit strong, and what I would have liked to know is what are the reasons behind wanting to go the edge way instead of using skills to accomplish what Paris wants to do? Are there any pitfalls to going one way or another?" And that type of thing. And it's fair, and I agree. Unfortunately, we couldn't give those answers either because we didn't know or because we didn't think that was the point of the show, but we want to be informative too. So, Clint,
I want to go on here and say that point right there of not describing the why, I think, is 90% of the issue with the interaction that tends to occur on the internet. When people tell somebody not to do something, they skip by the why it's not a bad idea. And unfortunately, all too often, it's because it's something hard to articulate. They may not understand it when they play, but they may not be able to, get to that point, or they may just be skipping it. And if you don't tell somebody why you have an opinion, then it really comes across more abrasive than most people ever intend. But bottom line is, if you're playing Savage Worlds and you're doing anything and you're having fun, then no one can say that you're doing it wrong, But yeah, it's that thing of not explaining and just going into, no, you shouldn't do that, and skipping the whole, why should you not do that?
Yeah.
And it's like, guys, you're not parents. Because isn't a full answer. Why? Because.
Man, I'm 47 and I just feel like I figured something out.
That's a good day, man. When you learn something new, it's always a good day.
No.
Now I'm just mad at my mom.
So can I ask the first question, or have you got a bit more to rattle off there?
No, go ahead.
So, as I've mentioned before, and even before the start of this podcast, I've banged on a lot about the philosophy of Savage Worlds as a system. So my first question in regards to the topics that we've been discussing: what defines a character more within Savage Worlds? Its skills or its edges?
Absolutely edges.
Absolutely edges.
Absolutely edges. So there's the design philosophy between skills and edges. And let's start with skills. skills are defined to create a foundation for character tropes. It gives players a common ground to go to when they're making a character concept. So if you think about why our skills are so broad, and that's generally the talk that's here, like shooting. And shooting covers everything from bows to bazookas, and it's already been kind of put out there, and people know for the, Savage Worlds Adventures Edition, we're actually putting climbing, swimming, and throwing and some other things all under athletics, So we're actually consolidating those into one skill. But the reason is, if you look at like shooting as an example, the marksman is a character trope. It's a concept people know. It could be a sniper. It could be a bowman, anything like that. That's a foundational trope. What makes them different and unique is when you get to edges. But when a player starts playing and it says, hey, I want to be the ranged guy, well, you need to start with shooting. And that. That's your foundation there. Now, there are some tropes that are a little bit more distinctive. If you look at investigators, you've got the hard-nosed private detective, you've got the charming socialite, you've got the geek on the computer doing research. And so you've got different skills for those because that fits those certain tropes. If I want to be the computer guy, I want to be the guy that looks stuff up. Well, you want investigation, to use the current rule system, as your skill, I really got to separate my mind right now. I've been working on Adventures Edition all day.
You almost slipped there. We almost got
I did. I almost said something else. But if you're the socialite, you want persuasion. The detective would use intimidation. And those are very specific as opposed to one general social skill. Those are unique, kind of those tropes of the hard-nosed sergeant, the private detective. These are all characters who have intimidation. They're not going to have a general social skill where you throw them into, a high society party and they're going to get along just as well, as someone else. The smart mouth who has taunt, generally, if you look at any like war movie, you find one of these guys in every group, the guy, you look at, The Great Escape. You've got, the guy that's the procurement specialist that has persuasion and can get anything, You've got Steve McQueen's character who's the king of taunt. He's always escaping and stuff like that, And then, Charles Bronson is in it, and Charles Bronson is always intimidating. Always, But so that's the baseline of kind of the way the skill philosophy is. It's not set up. It's set up to create that foundation for that concept. And then your edges are what's going to give you the distinction between the characters. So whether you have, the guy who's the machine gunner and has rock and roll, or the guy who's the sniper and has marksman, and maybe the sniper also picks up assassin, where the rock and roll guy, and this is going to sound weird, but picks up fleet-footed because he can't use rock and roll and move. So he gets fleet-footed, so it's easier, so he can make up for that lack of movement on the other actions. That's how he keeps up with other people, And it, so that is kind of the basis. And the other thing is, it's a whole lot easier for players to come up with a cool idea of what they want to do and put that into the framework of a new edge than a new skill.
Right.
Okay.
Excellent. Yeah. So with edges, and I've said this a number of times, and coming from an ignorant perspective, I guess, I've looked at a number of edges, or I've looked at the list of edges, and some of them seem out of this world fantastic, and then some of them seem fringe, more role-playing versus any mechanical or large mechanical value. So what would you say is the guide for creating a new edge so that it's not either too powerful or it's a waste of points?
Currently,
Yeah. we can skip this for a month or two.
Yeah. So it's a tricky balance to get to. And trust me, having been working on this for a while, it's definitely a tricky balance to get to. In general, if you're looking at an edge, and there's going to be ones that don't exactly match to this right now, but for now, let's just go ahead and say this. So say an edge is going to give you +2 to 1 skill every use.
Mm-hmm.
That's a pretty basic edge. If you think about it, that's what alertness is. It's +2 to notice. That's the most basic of edges. It's always a +2 to notice. There's no caveats to it. There's nothing else, like that. So that's pretty much a baseline. And then from there, you kind of have to look at, and quick digression, because hindrances definitely have role-playing and mechanical aspects. I mean, that's written into them. But the one thing that a lot of people don't understand is a minor hindrance is actually typically the reverse of an edge. Now, it takes a major hindrance or 2 points to buy an edge, but that means that the hindrances are always coming with more of a drawback than you get compared to what they would buy to some extent, if that makes sense. In other words, if you take a major hindrance, which will buy you an edge, the edge isn't going to be able to counter that major hindrance, at least not entirely. Right. It might be able to balance out versus a minor one, but you're only getting 1 point versus 2. But so, if you're looking at an edge, and then from that, you have to kind of look at, okay, now we get situationally. And those get a little bit trickier because they can be very setting based. If you have, let's say, Woodsman, and you're using it in Lankmar, which is essentially urban fantasy, really you probably should go for Thief instead. If you want that bonus to stealth to matter, urban environments versus woodlands. Now, survival may actually help in those instances and other cases, and you've got that backup if you ever leave the city. But for stealth purposes, Thief is going to be more useful in Lankmar in a city-based game than outside of it. So, that's why professional edges, it's in the name. It's part of something that's for the setting, Professional edges, that's, kind of in the GM section now, I believe, is that professional edges are the way to personalize your setting. If you look at what they're there now, they're fitting some of essentially professional edges make your classes. You've got your assassin, you've got your thief, you've got your ranger, your paladin, wizards, things like that. So, balance wise, yeah, it's a little bit tricky to figure out. Do you have a specific example?
No. Oh, damn, he got me. Got me back-footed.
Because then sometimes also you have edges that basically change how the rules work.
Yes.
Just like with quick or level-headed, these type of edges, they don't really give bonuses, but they let you do things that normally the rules won't let you do.
Right. Especially when you get into the initiative edges, because initiative is all based off the cards. So you're talking a completely different mechanic from the bonuses. And the other thing about bonuses is it's very much of a baseline, effect for an edge. But it shouldn't always be the go-to. Sometimes you should think outside the bonus box, so to speak, to make an edge a little bit more thematically appropriate to kind of what it does. Bonuses can do a lot, but it's not always just that part of it that comes into it. Let's see. Connections is probably the most complicated edge we have in the book. Like currently requires like 2 rolls to use. You have to streetwise to make a contact with a connection, and then persuasion to get them to help you. And so, if you're looking
potentially great benefits, though. I mean, you can have a lot of allies help you if it works.
Yeah, and that's it. It's really left up to the GM, but the GM using that edge should realize the players had to succeed at 2 rolls for an edge they had to purchase. If they do that, the benefit should be significant, and there's caveats to that edge. So that's, part of that kind of situation with it. But yeah, I mean,
so you were talking about balance or getting the balance in edges was a bit tricky.
Yeah.
For the current rule set, what was the philosophy behind which edge sat for which level rank? So I think the one that comes to mind for me was Sunder. Sunder's not one you can get straight up, even if you're a dwarf character, if I remember correctly from the Fantasy Companion. Is that correct?
Wow.
Haven't used Sunder for a while? I believe it's
a
seasoned edge.
Yeah, you switched to another one. I think Sunder is novice. I think Improved Sunder is seasoned.
Is it?
I'm not 100% certain.
Ignore the example, but what how do you decide from a design perspective, especially if you're a GM at home looking at your own setting, what guidelines would you give to go, well, that edge that's just too powerful for a novice. That really needs to, or it makes more sense that it goes to a seasoned or a heroic or a legendary character?
So it's an interesting question in that sometimes the answer can be the reverse. In other words, if you're doing an improved edge of Sunder, well, the idea might be the fact of the character, the player is going to have more feeling of satisfaction and accomplishment if they had to work towards this, as opposed to just picking it up as the next edge I get. Mm-hmm. So doing it as a rank higher means there's going to be more feeling of accomplishment in reaching it. In which case, okay, how do you make Sunder worth the fact that you're going to have to get the season to get it?
Right.
In other words, that's the concept of, this is one of the tricky things about mechanics is and design philosophy as a whole is you don't get so caught up in the details of the mechanics that you forget that the mechanics are there to serve play. How are the players going to enjoy this? What's going to make this be fun for the player? If I can just get it easily, that's not necessarily fun. But, if it's going to take me getting to heroic to have improved first strike, when I get there, that's going to mean something. It's going to mean a lot more because I've been waiting to get that and pick it up, So that is, that's part of the philosophy of looking at it. It's not just, is it too powerful and it needs to be higher? Is it something that we should make more powerful, a little better, because the players are going to want to work towards it?
Okay.
And it's also a case of getting back to fitting certain, I guess, conceits of heroes. What is a novice hero going to be capable of versus what is a seasoned hero going to be capable of, and things like that. So, yeah, it's a little bit of a tricky dynamic. In general, you want professional edges, even if they're nicer, to be something that's available at novice, because it should be something a character might be able to start out with. Like I start out as a thief or a ranger. They may have some serious requirements, which is going to restrict them from doing other things. This takes, 5 or 6 skill points invested in it, like a third of your skill points to get the requirements to get to this edge. That's if you've raised
like thief.
Yeah, thief.
Thief is really hard to get. I mean, climbing, stealth, and wow.
Yeah, or consider Woodsman. It requires, I believe, a D8 in survival and tracking. Well, to get that without paying, you have to build a Woodsman with a D8 smarts, you know? So that's 6 points if you bought a very smart character, you know, to get to it. That's a major commitment to starting your character, which gets back to something discussed earlier of where do you build your character from there? Well, if you've committed all the beginning points to kind of reach that baseline of concept, then you have a place to build with the rest because you're going to branch out and diversify a little bit and round out the character a little bit more.
Wow, that I must admit, that bit just there excited me a hell of a lot because one of the things that I've discussed with the guys is that need for my players' characters to see a progression too. And I've always been concerned that the characters start out more than novice, and I've felt that there hasn't been a great deal of growth or progression. But now that what you've just explained there, when I go back and look at how I'm going to alter or maybe create new edges for my specific settings, those requirements are going to certainly play a lot into, well, this is actually a novice character because you've actually had to funnel so much of your character's points or self into this thing, and now we can progress from that point. So thank you so much just for that bit alone. Thank you. That was outstanding. Thank you.
My pleasure.
He did say he was going to blow our minds. So.
Yeah.
I think we should
anyone else have a question? Because I have 100 and I don't want to take over the show.
I think we should just end the show right there. Well, let's just call her on a high note, man.
I haven't even gotten to the point where I was going to blow his mind.
Wow.
So I will toss it out there. One of the things you talked about was in skill use, and basically what we call, niche protection was referencing the D&D, playing 5th edition, and characters, have certain things that they access and everything like that. Have you realized that D&D 5th edition is a lot like Savage Worlds? If you scratch the surface.
Well, you pick an attribute, you pick a feat, and that type of thing when you advance, right?
Not even feats. If you look at the progression of the characters, what they're getting at each level is essentially a feat when they get to certain levels. At certain levels, I think it's every 4 or so, they can raise an attribute, like being able to raise one every rank, and then you look at like the certain abilities they have. If you look at the rogue, the skill master of them all, you look at what the rogue has. Their first level ability is, I believe, if I recall correctly, they get to double their proficiency bonus with like 2 skills or thieves' tools and skills. Essentially, they get a +2 bonus in D&D terms to doing that stuff. Anybody can take proficiency with thieves' tools, and if they have the same agility, proficiency bonus doesn't change regardless of class. They will be just as good as a rogue with thieves, unless the rogue applies that edge to their ability. And then you can multi-class. So basically, any fighter can take a first-level rogue and be just as good with thieves' tools and stealth, if they want to choose that as their other skill, as the thief. Until the thief gets to, I think, 9th, 10th level up in there, there's a way that they get an ability that, they can, I think, make a roll on a skill, and if it's a 9 or less, it counts as a 10. Again, does that not sound like an edge?
Just a little.
Yep.
Wow. Well, I have to resist the urge to reach back and grab all these books now and start flicking through pages. That's wow. Look
at that.
So you mentioned about professional edges that those a requirement are always novice because you want to start out with your niche. I like that word tonight. But has there been any talk, or are we going to see more edges that like improved thief or something like that, where you get it at a higher level, still keeping in with the same profession? Do you know what I mean?
No, probably not. No. So what I hope we do, and what I hope happens, and one of the things that I hope Paris gets out of this as well, is thinking outside the name of an edge. In other words, if you're going to make a thief, like a straight up thief, like you're going to do rogue, if you look at that level progression, look at the other edges that would do that. I mean, if you're, obviously you choose a specialization in like D&D, and that one of them is assassin. So if you start out with thief and you pick up the assassin professional edge, and then let's say you pick up acrobat, are you not making a thief with assassin? You've already got a high agility, so quick makes sense, so that you're going to be acting faster, have a better chance to act first, maybe catch somebody with the drop by acting first or something like that. So there are edges in there that support certain character concepts that might not look like that. The key one that I tell people is fleet-footed. Fleet-footed is a great edge for any ranged attacker, because we've got two edges depending on what you're doing. If you're a sniper or the auto fire guy, that your special ability only works if you don't move. So fleet-footed is actually basically a support edge for the ranged concept of a character, because it enables them to move on an off action and basically keep up movement wise and be able to use position in the game. It doesn't necessarily look like that at first glance, but in gameplay, it works. So that's one of the tricky things of it's not necessarily that there's an improved thief edge, but look at the edges that are out there that support being that. I mean, and if you look at our settings that we've done that have characters that are more like that. If you look at 50 Fathoms or whatever, where we have Dirty Fighter, Improved Dirty Fighter, we have the Close Fighting Edge, where if you're using a knife,
Treasure Hound,
yeah, you're using a knife. You can get in close, and essentially you get like a +1 to your fighting rolls for a weapon with no reach, and if it has reach, you actually get an extra +1 for every level of reach it has, because you get inside their reach. So I mean, there's other things out there, but at that point, again, you've got the core rules, and then you're building off of a setting. What kind of characters are we going to have in there? What edges do we need to support those concepts?
Actually, you bring up that last bit. You bring up is quite interesting, because many times it gets sort of shouted out by the community, just use core. You're overcomplicating the game if you add an edge or change something. My understanding of Savage Worlds has always been Savage Worlds is a toolbox. Use the tools in it as you see fit that works at your table. What I don't understand, though, from the community side point, and I'd like to sort of get from what you think about that, is that any time, from my experience, I can only go from my experience, is when someone seems to present an idea that they want to discuss about, hey, how about if we use the hammer in this toolbox, but we use it in this specific way, 90% of what they'll hear is getting held down. Not just do it the way it's in the book, which seems very counterintuitive to me for a game that's designed to be a toolbox and to let your imagination flow free. So from a design perspective, was Savage Worlds always meant to be that simple, like not simple, that defined within a box, or was it, hey, go hard, do what you want?
So this is a tricky thing to say. It's not designed to be a toolbox.
Okay.
Exactly. What it's designed to be, and this was where we kind of separated off of other quote unquote generic systems, was a core system. It's something you build on top of. If you're going to add it for whatever you're setting, when you're creating for your setting, you build on top of it, as opposed to necessarily changing anything underneath. Now there are tools to do those kind of things. I mean, there's obviously, and I mean, you can do that. I mean, if it fits. I mean, if you're doing a space game and you need astrogation, you put in astrogation, because that skill is important and it's going to be rolled, every session or every other session. Or if it's not even rolled that often, when it is rolled, it's going to be dang important, because if you fail, you end up in another, star system. But, it's not so that the other, when you talk about like other generics, and the kings of them are GURPS and hero system, of course. Those are built on the concepts of we're throwing everything out there to cover every single conclusion of what might be done. Pull out what you don't need. With Savage Worlds, we went, let's give you the core foundation for running your game. Add what you need for that specific game. Don't worry about the extraneous stuff. Add in what you need. So that's what the setting books and setting rules and stuff like that are about. And part of setting rules would also be edges, professional edges, or even combat edges, things like anything that fits the setting, more specifically. As far as being a toolkit to change rules here and there, it does get a bit tricky, because we talk about rules interacting in some ways, and those things have to be considered pretty carefully. A lot of people say, and I've heard this recently somewhere, that they had to read the book like 3 times to kind of start getting
dummies, eh? Who has to read a book 3 times?
Yeah, but really, the best way to learn Savage Worlds is playing it. Yep. Because then you start seeing how some of these things interact that may not make sense. Stuff that we get about how, the common thing of, it's easier to roll a 6 on a D4 than it is on a D6. That math is just bad. It's like, yes, but that's why the system always has 2 levels of success. The success and the raise. So the difference on those percentages for a wild card, by the way, averages out to like 1.1%. And those are 4 specific target numbers if you're comparing 2 specific die types across a potential 12 by 72 potential target numbers, but I mean, even more based off modifiers. But once you take in the fact of, 4 points higher or 4 points lower is either your raise or your success, that higher die type always is significantly better at the other one. And then the kicker is, of course, the higher die type is equally less likely to critically fail. Right. A D4 is going to critically fail 1 in 4 times. A D6 is going to critically fail 1 in 6 times comparatively to each other. The wild die is the same for both. So, there's that. But that's not necessarily, if you just look at it and you read it, you don't necessarily see that offhand. But when you play it and you see success versus extraordinary success, I want that higher die type, I definitely want that. And I really don't want to critically fail.
That's fantastic. I feel like I learned something just there. It's not that I needed to learn it, but it's something I just realized it, how true that is. Because that's what it is, the thing that you hear all the time is, you want to be the D4 because but you don't think about the actual realization is you got a 25% chance to fail as well. So that's kind of neat. There was a couple of things that I wanted to address. Paris is one of the things that you were mentioning is that like the edges and how your players always go to the combat edges, and why is there so many combat edges compared to the rest of the edges in the book? And I'm just curious to get Clint's take on that.
Well, there actually are more other edges than combat edges in the book.
Read
but
the
there
book,
are more
Paris.
combat edges in each section. They have the biggest section, And, the tricky part about that is, so it goes back to a certain amount of design philosophy. We're playing a role-playing game, okay? We can role-play our characters at the table, which can cover a lot of the social stuff that characters do. You can play your character at the table. You can't actually get into a fight at the table. Physically, you can't do please don't. You shouldn't, please don't.
You haven't played with Gary yet.
Yeah. But physically, I mean, what you're dealing with is you're dealing with one aspect of the game that you absolutely have to take outside the player. You know, combat has to be that way because it's outside the player, it's outside their actions. Where role playing, the social stuff, you know, yes, you know, you've got persuasion, you've got intimidate and stuff like that, but role play it first. And if you're doing a good job, you can get a bonus. Now, I would say that if somebody does a bad job, don't penalize them for that, because the reason we use skills for that is not everybody is comfortable. They want to play that type of character, but they may not be capable of being that outgoing and that socially conscious. So, you know, let somebody have that opportunity if they want to come through. But if not, that's what the dice are for, to give that player a way to play that type of character and not feel, you know, overwhelmed with social anxiety or any case like that, you know. But, you know, if you've looked at the game and you've looked at the progression over the years, I mean, you know, Savage World started out of a miniature game. And the history is, you know, if you guys don't know, is when Shane created the Great World Wars way back when for Deadlands, he actually thought at the time this would make a great role-playing game. But immediately after that, he thought, I'm not going to create another role-playing game to compete with my own role-playing game at Deadlands at the time. So, you know, that was how we had to get into 2000 and the changes that came about with, like, you know, 3rd edition D&D and the D20 license and how that affected the landscape and all that past history for Savage Worlds to come out of it. But so there was already a foundation of handling combat in it that was built in. But since then, you know, you've seen the difference between, you know, original Savage Worlds, Explorers Edition, the first version, and then Deluxe. I mean, when you get to Deluxe, and we've got the social rules, the dramatic task rules, you know, things like that. We've been building in more of the situations about, you know, those kind of things, and you know, we've tried tried to expand it a little bit more and more. But still on that concept of when you're at the table, the reason there are a lot of combat edges is because at that point, the player has to step outside themselves more, and it becomes more what's on the character sheet that's going to help define their character in that moment on the map or even theater of the mind or whatever at that point. And so that's why there's a bit more for those, because it's a point where the player is stepping outside the role-playing, or not role-playing, but it's not role-playing to handle combat. You can role-play during combat, but the combat itself is separate. So the edges give them a little bit more meat to that, you know, if that's what they want to go with. Now, of course, we've got options, and more so now since we've previewed them, for non-combat characters to be effective in combat without having to have combat skills or edges and stuff. I mean, Tests of Wills did that, and tricks and options like that. And of course, we've previewed by this time the new test rules and support rules that we're putting into Adventure Edition, which is going to let players come up with anything they want to be able to use those. And it can be, you know, in tests are specifically combat situations, you know, and support can be anything, but also in combat. So, yeah, we're trying to go out of that. But that's why there's a little bit more for combat, because it's a little bit more the players stepping outside themselves.
So it's probably a little late to crack this joke, but when Eric said that he really liked the word niche, I should have said it earlier. You pronounce it Niki. I've been waiting 20 minutes to get that out. But I'm like, I can't let it go. So the repair. The repair skill was the repair.
The one that invented niche protection, you know. I will add in real quick, by the way, that I don't necessarily believe in niche protection as a concept. I think a character's niche is the unique way that character has been built. Niche protection has kind of been more and more taken out of most role-playing games, to where if a character wants to be, you know, a D6 and lockpicking, current edition, lockpicking, but the thief has a D10 and has the thief, edge. Well, yeah, they're going to be better at it, but this other character, if they get in a situation where they're alone or they just want to have that backup or be able to, do a cooperative role for the other guy at some point, because that's part of what's in their, how they want their character to be. That's not a bad thing. I mean, and it allows the GM to work with that to create situations where, they've manacled the thief and put metal gauntlets around his hands. And the only way to get out is the other guy has to pick the lock. And so you have the thief in a situation where they have to aid them, just trying to help tell them, but can't physically do anything. And so again, I think, every character, once you start character creation, from that point on, characters are already different. On my soapbox here for a moment, the most important aspect of any Savage Worlds character, absolutely the most important, are their hindrances. That defines the character more than anything else. That right there is your definition for your character. That is almost where you should start. I don't know. I think we're planning on doing the preview of character creation pretty soon, but we talked about this at Gen Con. In the new book, where we start out with your character concept, race, and then hindrances. The first
for the bonus points, right? Also.
Oh yeah, it's actually the new character creation, role is in order of what you have to do. So you'll get your hindrances, which give you points to spend on anything later. And then you'll buy your attributes, which set how much it will cost to buy the skills. And then you get the edges after you've got your attributes and skills and any other requirements you might need to meet them. And then you get the gear in case you took poverty or rich or very rich, because edges can affect that. So, but again, I just think hindrances are probably the most, defining aspect of any character, as opposed to what they're good at. What's really important about any hero is what they're bad at. Indiana Jones is great with a whip. He's good with a gun. He's snarky and everything like that. But it's his fear of snakes that makes him cool. It really makes him stand out. So.
And that work around the hat.
It's one of the things that I was talking about before is when you went with your players always picking combat edges. That was kind of my point, and Clint sort of just put it into a nice little package there. Is that your players are losing the idea of their character concept, and they're taking edges based on what's going to help them mechanically in game, as opposed to what is the flavor of their character concept.
But Paris was saying that it was because there wasn't any other options for them to pick from.
Yeah,
that was his point.
Let's think about this a second, because I know the edge you specifically gave, because I actually listened to the other podcast, was quick.
Wow.
Okay. To get quick, a character has to have a D8 agility. So if your player is taking that, then they've already chosen to have a very agile character. If it was level-headed, they'd have to have a smarts of a D8. So there are some requirements there that the character had to meet to be able to take that edge in the first place, which meant the character was already somewhat built down that line. If the character had a higher agility than normal, quick doesn't necessarily not make sense for them. Well, so that is one other aspect to get in, and it gets back to those requirements I talked about. If you can't just necessarily take quick if you have a D4 or D6 agility just because you want quick. You have to have a concept of your character going down a certain path in some cases to be able to access those things.
I kind of feel like that's a bit of a bad example, because a lot of things are tied to agility. Like if his character started off with a certain concept, excuse me, and threw points into agility is I believe it's got the most attributes tied to it. So that's a little kind of or the skills.
Smarts.
You know what I mean? Yeah. Is it smarts?
Smarts. Yeah.
Smarts beats agility.
So they could have put a bunch of points into agility just to take something else and then take it quick. Here's one other thing that I wanted to quickly get out there too. Something that I thought of afterwards was repair. If you've listened to the podcast, we generally used repair as the go-to sort of reference. But it's funny that you had, and I thought about this later, such an issue with the repair skill, but you didn't have an issue with the idea of like shooting. Whereas shooting allows you to shoot a gun, a bow and arrow, a slingshot, artillery cannons. Like you're cool with the concept of shooting covering a lot of bases, but the repair thing was like stuck in your craw for some reason, where you couldn't see that one skill would allow you in a setting like a sci-fi setting to fix a starship, or in an auto, post-apocalyptic auto world setting would allow you to fix a car, and you just call it repair in either one.
We're gonna get on the space plumber track, aren't we?
Let me just preface a couple of things. So a lot of the questions that I ask are, I'm constantly looking at Savage Worlds from a different perspective than most. Like, I use it in a therapy setting. I use it to help young people build social skills and understand the world around them. So, and a lot of those guys have high functioning autism. And so when I am presenting the game to them, and this will actually lead me to a trappings question in a minute, but when I present the game to them and they go, I want to be an engineer that designs spacecraft, and I go, okay, you need the repair skill. And they look at me blankly and say, well, wait, what? That's repairing something. That's not building something from scratch. Right? So a lot of the questions that I ask, although, yes, they're designed to be sort of inflammatory in the sense that we explore a concept, you got to remember that the people that I work with, or the people that I GM with 5 days a week, they are either very black and white when it comes to their perception of the world and perception of words and perception of concepts. And I am trying to teach them things like trappings, and I'm trying to teach them things like character concepts. So when I say that my guys play, they build a character and they start playing and they look at the mechanics, and instead of them looking at their character and saying, my character is the face, I think I should now take a new edge for charisma or something like that, and there doesn't appear to be that many edges, or once they've taken them all, then they just look at, well, hang on, I'm sick of drawing a 4, right? I will build towards quick. I'm sick of the unstable platform penalty, and I'll build. So I know the argument is, yeah, but that's the character progression and it's learning. What I'm saying is, in the context that I work in, they're not making those decisions because it makes sense in the rollout of the story. They're saying that when they look at taking certain aspects for their characters, they're making decisions on a card. They're making decisions on a dice roll, as opposed to what I am trying to teach them, which is the progression and growth of an individual. And so they can see that happen, if that makes sense.
It does. It does definitely, to an extent. I am going to toss one thing out there, though. The baseline of them choosing those edges that you kind of put out there is, I'm tired of drawing a 4, or I'm tired of unstable platform, everything, does mean that the game has enough combat in it that's coloring their opinion of it.
That's a very important point, because one of the things that I look at a lot when I'm doing this is how I have to change as a GM. So I don't just look at the rules and go, why is the rules not working to what I want? I do look at my play style a lot now and go, yes, we are too combat heavy. Am I as much of the problem here as why they're needing to take quick? But one of the things that, and we said before the cast, is when I'm, although now you've changed my thinking on it with what you said earlier, is when I look at a D&D book, if I hand the player's handbook to my guys, right, and they see rogue, level 1, level 2, level 3, level 4, I get X, Y, Z, or I get those choices.
Right.
Sometimes when a lot of the time with Savage Worlds, because it's such an open world, and that can become too much for them, it becomes overwhelming. There are too many choices.
Right.
I've been looking for advice on how do I narrow that concept down, how do I narrow that field down, and which led me actually to these last 2 podcasts, is why why I came up with this. Why I'm in a space setting now. Do I need to change the skills? Do I need to add? I was focused on skills in the beginning, but now I'm very focused on edges. So from a design philosophy, and this now leads me to my trapping question, is I get this question a lot, is if I pick a trapping for a power, I usually get bonuses or minuses depending on what I've picked. And we hear the term use trappings for skills and for edges, but that doesn't alter anything, and that doesn't make sense to some of my guys as well. So I'm obviously explaining it wrong. But from your perspective as a GM, when you're getting your players to trap their skills and their edges and hindrances, what advice do you give them, or how do you play that out on a table?
I don't actually do that much.
Okay.
That's actually something, fans kind of came up with separate, the idea of, and I mean, it's not inconceivable of, my magician has taken lockpicking, but that represents the fact that, they use magic to pick locks that doesn't cost them PowerPoints or something like that. But you're getting into, I mean, for you, especially when you're stepping outside the box, it is a scary, scary realm, for the kind of guys you're running for, and I would also say you don't want to give up on combat, because I would guess that is a comfort zone for them, because one of the other things about combat edges and combat in general, and the way Savage Worlds is set up, is we look at it as a role-playing game. There are two parts of this that go on. There should be some game concept of it, of the tactics and choices and decisions that happen in a combat, but then also the role-playing the character. I'll bet those guys find a lot of comfort in combats because the rules are very delineated. Mm-hmm. And that gives them a comfort zone, which I bet is going to make it easier to keep them involved to try to bring in the role-playing and the social aspects. So do keep that in mind. But as far as doing trappings for edges, I mean, there are certain edges and things like that I can, go with. It's like taking attractive and doing it because your character has an incredible voice. Doesn't necessarily look good, but as the voice of James Earl Jones.
Like Gary, like basically.
Yeah,
not particularly good looking, but he's got a nice voice, right?
Touche, mister. Oddly enough, I was just thinking to myself, that explains why Eric likes combat so much.
Yep.
But you can do that, but I'm not sure that's necessarily a route you want to go. You're basically talking, for lack of a better term, advanced trappings. Taking other aspects of the game that don't use trappings and applying that concept to them. Even now, the thing about the trappings and the special, this adjusts this ability, this adjusts that ability. And I remember the examples that in there were always kind of put in just to kind of be that, examples. If you read the very beginning of that section, it says most of the time it should just really be flavor text. Don't worry too much about the fact that this firebolt has to do something special. Just say it's a firebolt, and the GM can say, all right, when you shoot this person, there's a chance this dry old barn that hasn't seen anything will catch fire, or, there might be a chance, that's one of the mechanics in there. There's a chance the person will catch fire. We don't necessarily have to worry about it bypassing armor or doing anything like that. So that in and of itself of trying to adjust effects like that does kind of get into advanced trappings as well. If the GM wants to, go ahead and put down something concrete to those effects that makes it more comfortable, and that might help in this case too. But as far as doing skills and things like that, I don't know. It's a tricky thing. I talked about it earlier. Really, in this next edition, I think you'll see concepts like that built in a little bit more in the ideas of like supports and tests and things like that, because the creativity is there to come up and use a skill. However, you just come up with a creative way to use it. You describe how it's used. you know? So, I mean, theoretically, if a magician wanted to say, I'm going to use my spell casting to do a test on this guy, opposed by his smarts, and define it as I'm casting a minor flare. Doesn't cost any power points. It's something like that. You know, that's what I'm doing. Okay, GM can say that's perfectly viable, you know, for that use. But, you know, we're getting into next edition stuff, so to speak, you know.
Sure.
Currently, you know, there's nothing built in to make that more feasible. That's tacking something on, again, when you get back to that whole creating it on top of the foundation. And
so where my original thinking came from in terms of the edges in that mode of thought was a letting me down. Not letting me down, but there wasn't enough choice. So one group that I have, which are very focused on exploring social interaction and emotions and stuff like that. So they're higher functioning, for want of a better term. So they chose ETU as their game, and so they, as I'm on record as saying, when I first looked at ETU, I'm like, why would anyone want to? In my group, want to play this? They want to roll studying. What is this? I don't get it. But it's been one of our most successful games. And what I felt was happening in that game is as they got to, I think it was their third year, all the skills and edges that were all around socialization and creating more empathic characters was the options were running out. And it was then all of, you know, we're picking combat skills, but it didn't quite fit because these are university students. That's what led me to my original thought. So when I was building on Hero ES and that space concept, I didn't want to fall down that track again. I was almost looking at a Star Trek style thing where combat is an element of Star Trek, but it's certainly not the biggest component, is it? It's more about them making up technobabble and diplomatic interactions with other races. And so because we still have to use the rules for that, I was feeling that maybe there weren't enough edges, and would we look at skills to compensate for that? And that's what led us down this whole path. So thankfully, listening to you today, my mindset has changed on quite a number of things. But if you were looking at a game yourself that was geared more around diplomacy and social interaction versus combat, what's your advice to GMs in terms of how to apply the rules or what direction to head?
Okay. I'm going to start out with ETU is awesome. I love ETU.
Yep.
Getting to work with the guys was great. And I will also say by their third year, they should be getting more combat heavy because I know you're in Australia, so you may not understand. This is Texas. Okay. So, yeah, that'll happen. So if I was doing something that was going to be more interactive like that, so we talked about a little bit about making edges, stuff like that, I think before we started here. But here's an interesting little trick you might consider. Look at the combat edges, take whatever combat skill is listed, and go, could I put persuasion or intimidation in there?
Oh.
In other words,
elaborate a bit on it? Yeah.
So let's say I have a character who has, is going on down the persuasion route, more or less. Okay. Let's look at, okay, well, I want something else to kind of focus on this, do this character, do something like that. It's like, okay, well, how about that you have, you're going to have the edge, center of attention. It's like, okay, cool. What does center of attention do? Well, basically, you're going to make one persuasion roll, and you're going to affect everybody adjacent to you with it. It'll be at -2 unless you get improved center of attention, and you can get that. It's a novice ranked edge. You can get that. That's sweep.
Okay.
That's what you've done there. I want to intimidate. Okay, listen. I'm the intimidation guy. I want to intimidate two guys. Equally, I want to hit both of them at the same time. I want to be able to, force a personality kind of thing. And it's like, okay, so you basically want twice as menacing. you want twice as menacing as an edge. It's frenzy. We're replacing fighting with intimidation. You can do 2 intimidation attacks as one action, and like intimidation, you could choose to double down on one guy, hit him with one threat right after another, or you could hit 2 separate people, twice as menacing, So there's, some concepts in there that you might look at. I would also suggest that you wait until, October 16th plus 30 days, and then about 2 to 3 weeks after that for some ideas. But, before you go too far down the line. But I mean, that was one question. Well, sorry, that was one question I wanted to ask, but without any specifics, can we expect new material from the Adventure Edition to help someone like Paris with what he's trying to do?
I think what Eric's
yes or no.
I think what Eric's trying to say is, how many times is Paris going to have to read the Adventure Edition to understand it?
So I'll give you a little bit here. One, we already talked about character creation being in those set, that order that we've put out there. Mm-hmm. After character creation, each section of the book follows that same order. So we're really trying to make it easy to go through the book and understand, everything as it goes through. So, I mean, when you go through and you look, after you've looked at the basic character creation information, the next thing you're going to find, concept, that's in your head. But the next thing that's going to be there is going to be race. And then there's going to be the section on hindrances. And then we're going to talk about your attributes and getting your skills. And then we're going to get to your edges. It's going to be down that same order. So it is going to, follow that, and it is going to be hopefully easier for people to pick up, especially new people, and get in and more smoothly go through the rules like that. But there will also be some stuff that, one, we've got some, description, we've got a sidebar on what some of the differences are and changes, for people that have the old rules. But, there are a couple of things that are going to be in there for, discussing some design philosophy stuff, mostly in how it affects, making your own things, like in skills, like talking about if you need a skill, you're running a space game and you need astrogation, put astrogation in there because it's going to be rolled, comparatively, if you have a character that I want to be on the Starship Enterprise and I was a plumber before I got here, after having the discussion of, did you read the type of game I was going to run? Plumber. You could sit there, that kind of case of, that's really not going to come up in the game, much. So that's really just falling under your common knowledge. You don't need repair, which, by the way, repair is just for mechanical and electric devices anyway. It wouldn't be for plumbing. It would be common knowledge.
Dummy.
But I'm saying, it's like, look at like what you're going to do. If you're going to add a skill, like that information on adding a skills, make sure it's something that's going to be significant in the game and use, because again, one of the things I think you guys touched on last time is characters have a set amount of skill points to spend at the beginning, and then, raising them afterwards, it's not a huge number. The more skills you add, the more you dilute that pool, as far as it's spent. Now you can say, well, I'll add more skill points, but, consider it's like, Star Trek. Well, we could add astrogation because we're really not going to have to worry too much about writing and boating,
Mm-hmm.
To, a lot of extent. But so, yeah, there's going to be, some stuff in there. And of course, we've already talked about having a GM kind of product to help GMs, separate. Yes.
On a scale of
that, it's going to be a game master's handbook because it's not going to be anything as detailed as that. But
on a scale of 1 to 10, when you were listening to the last podcast where we were debating or talking or discussing, how dumb did you think we were? You don't have to answer that question.
I'm kind of wondering which way do the numbers run, and do you guys know?
You just give us a number, and then we'll re-edit in which one's the good one.
Which one? Just at this point, Clint, say every number from 1 to 10, and we'll just that would be number 5.
Okay.
7.
So, Kickstarter, what kind of rewards are we looking at besides soft cover, hardcover, PDF? Are you doing anything special? Maybe throwing in some kind of box set? Give me some Black Edition or Adventure Edition bennies, or maybe something along those lines. Maybe new adventure cards, maybe a new adventure deck. What are we putting out here?
Paris, do you have any more questions?
Oh.
Actually, I do. It's in relation to something Gary brought up last time. So you guys brought out the there's that thing happening with Drive-Thru RPG where people can put out their own
swag. Yeah, Savage Worlds Adventure is good.
Yeah. So just out of interest, right, as sort of an official reason, why is none of the other why couldn't Gary do something for 50 Fathoms or something like that, just so that our listeners will know?
So one of the things, a lot of people have to realize is it's like when D&D, when DM's Guild started, the only setting that was open was Forgotten Realms. And the other settings that they've put out, I mean, Eberron, I know, was the last one
recently.
Right around FinCon, I think, was the announcement. I actually got to have dinner with Keith and Christian Serrano when we were at DragonCon, Keith Baker and Christian. So,
does he sound as good in person as he does when you talk to him or listen to him on the podcasts?
Keith Baker?
Christian Serrano.
Yes. I mean, it's even better live and in person. Plus, he's just a handsome, handsome devil, too.
He is, isn't he?
He is. And he is an awesome, awesome guy. Let's get on the Christian Serrano is awesome train. Christian signed up to run a game for a Savage Saturday Night in North Carolina. He lives in Georgia, He had other things come up so that he couldn't make it. He drove on Saturday, came up in the afternoon, ran for a Savage Saturday Night slot, stayed the night. The next morning, he got up and drove home.
Whoa.
That's what he does. That's the kind of guy he is, because he had committed to run a game and people had signed up for that game. He didn't have anything in that time period, but he had stuff like family stuff Friday and Sunday that came up. He drove up. I got to chat with him for a while, which was great. We had dinner and before Savage Saturday Night, but he ran his game. I got to play in it. He ran Eberron, of course. And then, basically stayed the night and had to drive back first thing the next morning. So Christian Serrano is, not only does he sound great, he just kind of is a great guy, we're off that side. What was your other question, Paris? Because I was just all stars in the eyes for a moment.
So just the reasoning from Pinnacle's point of view, why not using their life stuff.
So I want to consider the fact that in our past 16 years, how many settings we've put out compared to how many there are officially for Dungeons and Dragons.
Mm-hmm.
Plus, Plus, consider the fact that we have, some of those we don't own ourselves; those are licensed. So those are pretty much off the table for us. Tertiary licensing isn't really a thing so much. But then others, there are, other licensing things that are on the table that kind of make that harder to do. And it's also a case of being a very different system. One of the things we'd like to see people hopefully do with swag, and it's one of the things we love to see at conventions and shows, is people come up with their own stuff. I mean, the king of this is Carl Kiesler. I mean, his League of Extraordinary Gentlemen in the 70s. Gen Con, he ran Trailer Park Shark Attack, which I think they're going to put out. And I hate that I didn't get to play it because everyone I talked to who played it just had a blast. You know, Ghostbusters, you know, versus Goonies or something. Ghostbusters and Goonies, meet Goonies or whatever. We love it when people come up with their own stuff. If you're playing in somebody else's sandbox, there are certain limitations, and that kind of gets tricky. It also, this is a tricky way to put it. There's a certain amount of control that goes into the licenses other people are using that we don't have in ours. It's not, it's not hidden, but if you look through the DM's Guild license and pretty much every other license that's based off of that, the publisher owns everything that's put out there. They own all that material, you know. It also is open for anyone else in the guild to use your material, and they don't even have to attribute the original author the way that it's kind of set up. Those things were kind of, those were totally opposite, what we've done with Savage Worlds. I mean, if you remember, for years we've had on our forums the statement that anything somebody puts out there is their property. Whatever somebody puts out there, if you want to use that yourself, you need to contact them and get their permission. That it's really important that people own their own stuff for us that they put out there. But that also means it makes it very hard for us. We need to control our own stuff to a certain extent. Their licenses allow them that because they own everything. They can, they can pull anything, they can take anything, they can do anything. And, the guys at Wizards are awesome. They don't really do that. For them, it's a chance to see who's up and coming and who's got great ideas. And, there's been some people that have done some great stuff and gone on to write for them. That's not where it goes. But for us, it's not even something we wanted to put out there. Mm-hmm. So it's like what we'd rather see people do is come up with their own ideas. What's their setting? What's their setting idea? What do they want to put out there? What do they want to come up with? Everybody, it's kind of like a little bit, it's extending out the ideas that we talk about with tests and support being about encouraging creativity. Come up with concepts and ideas of how you're going to do this. That's what swag is. Use your creativity. Go out there and put something out there. I'll tell you straight up. One of the things that led us down that path was actually Richard Woolcock and Saga of the Goblin Horde. Richard's stuff didn't really fall under where it would work with the official licensing, the way that worked, before. But it was this is a great idea. This is a neat concept that's out there. It's, basically, merging some ideas. He said it himself of, the idea of the goblin player characters from Pathfinder with Savage Worlds, but then adding his own twist on that stuff. With swag, a product like that is completely viable, straight out of the gate, and that's the kind of thing we'd like to see people do, as opposed to, worry about somebody doing something with Deadlands that, we wouldn't be comfortable with. Or any other setting that's kind of out there, especially, we don't have teams of lawyers. We don't have a legal department. We don't have that. We're, we got one full-time employee who owns the company, pretty much, and, the rest of us are pulling double duty on some other jobs and doing things and doing it because we love it. And I'd rather let people embrace their creativity than have to worry about writing out the legalese to protect our own stuff so that we can ensure if a Deadlands movie or TV show comes out, the property is well placed and nobody's going to point to, hey, what about that, hentai Deadlands adventure that somebody talked about over here,
Hentai's not the bad one, right, Eric?
Yeah, it is.
Okay, it is? Okay. I still don't know which one's that. Cool. I actually have a question pertaining to to the new rules and stuff like that. Is there a design, you're talking about game design when it comes to the new rules and stuff like that? One of the cool parts that I liked that I was just reading and you've been talking about repeatedly is the tests. So before, when it came down to it, you had basically 2 options, but now you have sort of an unlimited set of options, which really is, to me, I find that very intuitive, which I like. You know, you can, you want to do something, it's this skill versus that skill, and away you go. In the rest of the rules that you've come out with, even, you know, what is the design idea behind the new Savage Worlds Adventure Edition? Were you going for rule of cool? Were you going for simplicity? Were you going for intuitivity? If that's even a word, do you know what I mean? Like, does that make sense?
That's kind of all of it, really.
Yeah, just sort
part
of
of it was making it more intuitive, making the rules more streamlined. You know, we had a lot of what I originally used to call, kind of purposeful exceptions in some things, you know, for certain, you know, reasons, certain rules that work different ways because of how they worked. And there were reasons behind that. But in looking back at it, I mean, it's been, you know, 15 years of going through this. And there was a lot, you know, that we kind of looked at. And part of it was, one, making it, there were some certain things we wanted to go over. We knew some certain, you know, issue, you know, things that have come up over the years that we want to look at. One is the whole, you know, the game plays a lot easier than it necessarily reads. That's something that we've heard a lot, you know, so we wanted to make it so that it would be clear. However, we didn't necessarily want to lose the fact that we went with of not following kind of the writing conceit of repeat something 3 times if you want somebody to remember it. You know, that's, you know, something that's put out there. It's like, you know, it is, you know, it requires kind of following up. It's like why I answer rules questions on the forums, that it can be easy to miss a sentence or a page or something like that. And you can skip over something, you know, easily, but we wanted to make it a little bit easier to read, a little bit more intuitive to understand. We wanted to make it more cohesive. I mean, we've already, you know, in putting out the test, we've already mentioned the distracted and vulnerable conditions, which were previewed in Flash Gordon. And what you'll find is those conditions can be used for a lot of things. A distracted character is -2 to trait rolls. And it's that simple. Distracted, that character is -2 to trait rolls. Okay. Vulnerable, that character is +2 to be affected by anybody. Anybody affecting him gets +2. It's not the -2 parry, you know, that we had in like tricks. It's not the +2 to affect the one person you run it against, you know, the next action you do that Test of Wills did. It's +2 to be affected. And it's not even, you know, fighting or anything like that. Anything the person wants to do. So it leaves it open to them. Again, it goes back to that thing of helping out the non-combat characters. It's not just a case of it's easier to hit them with a fighting attack. It's easier to do another test on them. If you want to make them distracted and vulnerable, you know, it's easier to do a lot of stuff if somebody sets them up. But then what, you know, we, you know, worked on and discovered is there are other parts of the rules where those slide in very nicely. And thus it's easy to say you're vulnerable, you're +2 to be affected. A test can cause you to be vulnerable. This other thing over here can cause a character to be vulnerable. It might cause them to be vulnerable and distracted. It's making it more cohesive, more intuitive to some extent, and more streamlined, you know, and what's going on. So, you know, there's easier to understand, easier to play, and in the end, always sticking to, you know, fast, furious fun. You know, that's a big part of design criteria is, like I talked about earlier, is never get so caught up in the mechanics that you forget about fun. You know, fun always trumps a mechanic. So you got to consider the player experience, as the fancy people say, the experiential aspect of playing the game, you know, as well as the mechanical aspect of what, you know, what works.
Is there anything that you've come up with that you haven't discussed yet or put out to the public so far that you feel is going to be sort of like, your favorite idea or your game changer, or it's the stuff that you've already thrown out there with the tests and the entanglement and all the effort and whatnot? Is that the good stuff, or is there some really good stuff that we have yet to see?
Oh, you have no idea.
I like that answer.
To me,
the wealth system, the chase. What's your favorite out of the two?
Yeah, new chase rules. I mean, that's basically a given. Every time we do a new book, we always put in new chase rules. That's our goal every time. I will say this is probably my favorite chase rules that we've done, and that counts the set that I wrote for Explorers Edition, which is really hard for me to say because that has been, one of my favorites personally, but I really like this, and I have to give a lot of that credit to Shane on those. I mean, we work on a lot of stuff together, but he kind of came up with this idea, and we hashed it out. But yeah, I like that. I love that. There's so much to it that it's. I mean, the nice thing I really like about it is it really is so backwards compatible. Like, you don't have to do much to pick up any book and still play this game, because it's not necessarily affecting the stuff that's in those books so much as it is just how easy and smooth the underlying mechanics work, And so there's, if we did change, and there are edges that changed. I will say that straight up. There are some changes to edges. I mean, it does go back to that concept of we've seen these edges now. Let's work a little bit more towards balancing these things out. I mean, we've got more tools to make that happen. We know more to make that happen. But if a character had very attractive before, they're going to have very attractive now. If they had charismatic, they're going to have charismatic. First strike, counterattack, things like that. There will be new edges. Obviously, of course, I think we've discussed that already. Not what they are, but that we had some. But it's not going to make it's not going to make the old stuff incompatible. It's just going to make it so much more awesome. Just think. But yeah, I mean, I really hope people get this book. I mean, it really is a total package. We talked a little bit earlier of how the previews kind of frustrate me because people don't see, there's, and it's not, there's not anything we can do. I mean, they're looking at how it would interact with the current rules, without virtue of seeing the total package that's been put together. But I think that's really it. When people see the total package, that's the part that I'm really excited about, and I hope everyone else is too, obviously. But it's just
yeah.
Yeah.
How disappointed were you that Shane decided not to name the game the new edition after you and Jody?
It wasn't really going to be named after me and Jody. It was his idea of. The thing that we went through is going through names was really hard because every time we came up with what came like if we said, like Savage Worlds Ultimate Edition. Well, are we're not going to say that this is the last thing we'd ever learn about Savage Worlds. That, that's just not it. I mean, we've learned a lot, but we don't think it's necessary, and then we're like, well, do we call it the Penultimate Edition? Well, then we only have one more edition we could do. We're done. No, we're not going to go with that. It's like, and so, we started out with black because we were thinking, well, we're just going to call it, black edition. We'll do a black cover. We're differentiating it from the other editions, and that was, that was the line went down. And again, we went round and round on names for so long that we were like, look, We're just going to use black as the working title. That's just what we'll call it in-house. That's what we'll say. That's what we'll go with. I don't think originally it was we were even going to talk, use it publicly, but it just came a part of, we didn't have any other way to differentiate it. So we started using working title. But, as we got closer and closer, we were like, oh, we really got to come up with the title for this. I mean, Shay was, well, we'll just call it Savage Worlds. And we were like, yeah, I don't think that's, I mean, how do people know it's, it's not the other Savage Worlds. We want to make sure that if you're looking for the current version of the rules, you look at the cover and you see Savage Worlds Adventure Edition. That's how you'll know that's the current version. I mean, other than the ability to open it up and look at the bottom of the credits page where there will be a date, a year there. I think that boggles my mind the most about the people who say there's no way to tell which edition of Savage Worlds is the current one. There's a date. Copyright date. It's kind of required to put it in there. So, but
good point.
Yeah, but again, it needed to be something visual right on the cover. But no, it didn't bother me at all. As a matter of fact, the closer we got to, the Kickstarter and announcement and everything, the more nervous I got of, I really want us to have another name, guys. We're getting closer and closer. It's getting too close to, I don't want us to get to the point that we're trapped into that,
Right.
It's good that you go ahead.
Go
ahead.
So I know you can't tell us anything about the Kickstarter, but will there be stretch goals? You don't have to tell me what they are, but will there be stretch goals?
There might be stretch goals.
So
I'll tell you one thing about it. We do have one thing for this Kickstarter we have never done before that I think is one of I think is so cool. I think is going to be so cool personally. And
don't tell us what it is. Just that's all you need to say.
Yeah. It is something we have never done before, and
Thanks, Clint. That's going to make the next wait from October, then 30 days, then 2 weeks after. That's just made it so much easier. Thank you. That's awesome.
Actually, this is actually going to be something during the Kickstarter. So this isn't going to be a 30-day thing. So it will be during the actual Kickstarter that this thing will happen. It is going to be kind of part of the Kickstarter concurrent. Yeah.
So Paris, have you ever heard that joke? How do you keep a moron in suspense?
Yeah, just give him a Kickstarter.
No, I'll tell you tomorrow.
Thanks, bud. Yeah.
I also wanted to say it is kind of too bad that they didn't call it Black, because the Black edition actually has a nice ring to it. And on that note, I'm really glad that your last name is Black and not like the guy that invented the toilet bowl, Crapper. Can you imagine if your last name was the Crapper edition? Like you got a great last name for.
You know where to read it, it would be a given.
You got a great last name for a book edition. The Lamoureux edition. Like what?
Lamoureux edition. Right. Clint, since you're here, anything else you want to plug? I know you and Jody have this. You mentioned it earlier. This amazing side company too.
Side company, like our main business. Yeah. We do Carolina game tables. So we make game tables. Sorry, Paris, can't ship to Australia yet, but that is really something Jody wants to do because she wants to go do PAX Australia. So she's pushing for it so that we can do that. But we do game tables, and I'm actually a third generation furniture manufacturer. So nice. Back when we kind of did this was my peanut butter chocolate moment of realizing there wasn't anybody in the furniture industry who was making game tables. These were folks who came in from woodworkers and handcrafting and stuff like that, but nobody actually in the industry. So that was where I went with. So I wanted, our tables are, nice mahogany tables, but we don't do any of those add-ons on the outside because most people, their game table is their dining room table. So we wanted to get people a table that was going to look like a nice dining room table, but you could take the top off and play your games inside. And if you're not done, you can leave all that awesome terrain, as long as it's not taller than 3 inches, and put the top back on, you know, and it looks like you're getting, and leave the game set up inside of there. So, CarolinaGameTables.com. You can go check us out there, see what we've got. We've got coffee tables, kitchen, dining, up to Tablezilla. And while I can't say any specifics, do keep an eye out, because in the next week or two, we are going to be making an announcement about something regarding our tables. I will put it out there without going into specifics. We are trying to do something to help out actually with Hurricane Florence, because we are in North Carolina, but also Hurricane Maria, because we do have there is a Savage Worlds fan, fairly, guy who's really loves the game, who has been there and been through this. And Jody had been in contact with him quite a bit, and we actually sent him some care packages of batteries and stuff that he needed way back when it was worse. And it's just been something that really impacted us, knowing that, even now, a year later, they're still going through time. And then, of course, here we get hit with one too. And, we've had people impacted, and we're like, it just kind of brought it all back. So we're going to, we're working on something to kind of, do something to kind of give back, but then, also, put it together with like an announcement that we have coming too.
If it's 50 Fathoms themed, Gary's all in.
Sign a brother up.
Tell you what, Gary, if you buy a table, I will throw in a copy of 50 Fathoms, and I'll write a Savage Tale on the back page.
How about this? If I purchase a table, will you fly to Australia and build it for Paris in your underwear while oiled up with mahogany oil?
Mahogany oil actually isn't a real thing. It's actually they take other oil and they just do like a mahogany. Yeah, it's really not.
We don't need to get into the details. I was just thinking stretch goal oiled up.
He's closer to the source for our mahogany, because we don't use the kind that comes from South America, because we use a farm raised sustainable kind that actually comes from Indonesia, that variety. So you're actually closer to our wood source, but you can never have one of our tables. Even if it's shipped to Australia, I think I'll just exclude you. Just all Gary.
Oh.
I live within driving distance of PAX Australia. What if we invite you and Jody out? You can stay free at my place, enjoy the hospitality, and I don't know if you felt like building a table. Yeah.
Bring in some oil.
You do not know how tempting that would be. I hesitate to think about just even mentioning that to Jody at this point. This is like, honey, we really can't. We really can't. Wait, he said we could stay at his house.
Yeah.
You understand we have to fly to Australia with tables.
Man. As you said, we're close to Indonesia. We'll get you some wood. It's all good.
Right.
Why don't you just make a flying table? Problem solved.
Could go with my flying shark. I could send the shark. And it should work. I think it's a great white, so it should home in on the Great Barrier Reef at least. And that's most of the way there, right?
You could corner a new niche market, like the ultimate modular table, where, like, I don't know, all the pieces come in that, 30 centimeters by 30 centimeters, and you just slot it together like Lego.
No,
you can ship that.
That is not our style. We have, we're not doing the flat pack IKEA style shipment. There are other guys out there that do that, and I'm not going for that. I mean, ours, I use like steel corner braces and triple bolts. The only thing that doesn't come attached are our legs. So if you buy our Tablezilla is 8 feet long and 4 foot 10 inches wide.
8 feet long.
Yeah.
Whoa.
It's over 2 meters long, and over a meter. It's almost.
Yeah.
A meter's about
over a meter.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. So, yeah, I mean, it's why we call it Tablezilla. It's a monster. Now, if you could imagine that whole top of that is one piece, you know, when it's carton, that's
Sits how many? 12 people?
For dinner, but it's actually set up for gaming for 8 because gamers need more room.
Don't worry, Eric. You don't have.
But a purpose-built 6 meter by 6 meter gaming shed in the backyard that I built. It's be perfect. I'm just saying.
Eric doesn't have 8 friends.
No, no.
Do you make
it on the floor?
Do you make a table for one person?
I guess the coffee table would count as that. We actually did just start doing the coffee table at dining height, like the 31 inch height or whatever for people that have like apartments and stuff. You could get one of those and you just sit at it and play your game by yourself.
Play chess by myself. Yeah, try to beat me.
Try to beat yourself.
No,
just move around to the other side.
No, I've seen your tables and at conventions, and wow, the craftsmanship, and you can pick the lining and everything. Wow, beautiful.
Yeah, I put a lot of my background. So my background is actually upholsterer, fabric, furniture. So it's like I tell people it's like our interiors on our tables, the ones we take as samples. I've had a latte, a Coke spilled in it. It's not something we want. Took a paper towel, blotted it up, and there's no sign it happened. It's actually a fabric that's designed for upholstery for like hotels and bars. So it's like proprietary, like stain resistance and stuff like that, and cleanability. So now I will admit, when the lady spilled her coffee in it, my heart skipped a beat or two. But I was like, I never wanted to test this stuff.
Now, if you just had that flying shark thing, you could have just showed her who was boss. Do your tables will they like not show blood either? If say like somebody, I mean, have you tested it for staining?
Just wipe it up. I mean, I'm not guaranteeing it, but the manufacturer says pretty much anything. The important thing with blood is you want to blot, not wipe. Okay.
Okay.
Blot.
Noted.
It actually applies to any liquid, but for you, blood. Yeah.
Duly noted. I've seen the tables. They're nice. I wish I could talk my wife into purchasing one. Unfortunately, there's no games allowed to be played in this house because I am such a mega nerd. She won't have anything to do with it. I have to take my gaming out of the house or down here in the corner of this basement that I'm living in right now.
Oh.
Yeah. She's too cool for that. She's too cool for me.
Well, that's the thing about our tables. They're full coverage tops. So with the top on, it hides all your nerdery. And it looks like it looks like hey, just get her the table and say, I'm buying you a mahogany dining room table because I love you so much. Don't worry about these little holds over here at the side. That's nothing.
That's the leaf.
That's the leaf, yes.
That's it. All right, well,
thank you,
that
guys.
was fun.
Yeah, I had a good time.
Thank you. It went beyond just a topic, which is good. We got to know you a little bit better and to know a little bit more about Adventure Edition, which is great.
Yeah.
Yeah, I can't thank you enough. You've certainly opened my mind to a whole bunch of new possibilities with Savage Worlds, and it's good to hear from the friendly face of the hobby, which is fantastic. So thank you so much.
Oh, thank you, and very seriously, Paris, thank you very much for what you're doing with these kids and these people, because and it has been amazing how many people we've met who have used Savage Worlds to reach out. Even here in North Carolina, there was a guy who used it for at-risk juveniles and stuff to help them socialize as well. It wasn't an autistic thing. It was more of having, just, bad environmental cases and stuff. But
thank you guys because of Savage Worlds, because of the ability. I know I've played many role-playing games. I don't think I could have achieved what we've done without Savage Worlds, and because of what we were able to prove, the organisation that I work for, Genu, has given us our own place. So we do it now 5 days a week, and we are, as of next semester, we're actually also looking to help those kids that have disengaged from school and find themselves in trouble. So we're expanding, and it's all thanks to Savage Worlds. So thank you.
Oh, that's awesome.
I will say that Eric Lamoureux is a living testament to the power of Savage Worlds and its healing properties. Right. He went from a mentally challenged small Asian boy to this fine, outstanding gentleman you see in front of you right now.
What?
He's blossomed. Not only does it help. Never mind.
Gary, we'd like Clint to come back maybe at some point.
He will. Look at him. He's just a little shocked right now.
I'm still wondering how we're going to stat out the Pelion. I mean, when it pounces, does it always urinate? Is that what happens?
Yeah.
That's just what happens when he's shaken.
That's right. Had to pee a little bit.
He pees a little. Pelion. Sorry, Charles. Blame Gary. It's his fault.
Yes.
All right.
Much love out to my old buddy Charles.
So yeah, maybe in a couple of months we'll have you back and talk about the new edition.
Yeah,
now that you'll be able to talk about it freely. Yeah.
You were all lying, Clint. You lied all about this stuff. Everything. We believed you.
Hey, put a new cover on the old book. What is this?
So that's the surprise he was talking about. The same book, new cover.
Yeah. And Paris will be like, I've read it 4 times now, and I still don't get it.
Ooh.
You guys pick up me a lot for that, but Clint pointed out that you learn Savage Worlds better by playing it than reading it.
I want to add on to that. It's true that you learn how to play the game better by playing it with somebody, but make sure that person knows the rules too, or you're just learning it wrong.
Exactly.
That is true. That is true. Yeah.
As an addendum.
I've definitely gone into some conventions where I've gone into zones where everybody seems to play this rule one way, and I'm like, wait, what? It's like, well, that's how I learned. Who did you learn from? From him. I learned from him. Who is patient zero here? Who's
right? And whatever you do, don't learn it.
Have that page in it? What?
Don't learn it from Eric, because you'll be going around going, listen, you're shacking. How many times do I have to explain the shacking rules to you?
All right, folks, let's stop this. Yeah. Have a good one.
Do you roll Vigor or Spirit to recover from shacking?
Exactly. Right?
Not Vigor,
I hate you guys.
Frankenstein's minion.
All right. That's it for this episode of the Wild Eye Podcast. Eric's left the channel. He's probably gone off to cry himself to sleep on his huge pillow.
So mean.
The Wild Eye Podcast is not affiliated with or endorsed by Pinnacle Entertainment Group or official Pinnacle licensees. Any of the products mentioned on our show or appear on our website are the property and copyright of their respected owners. All music and artwork is used with permission of Pinnacle Entertainment Group. All items are used under fair use and educational and review purposes. All other items are the intellectual property of the Wild Eye Podcast.